enthused about the election, maybe?
Well, they're enthused to be on television and there's a big event going
Possibly.
on, and reasonable enough.
Let's get on to that question about enthusing the electorate, because, I mean, you can argue it different ways, but we all suffer, don't we, as a democracy? Every party suffers if you can't get people out to vote. Let me ask you both what you're doing to try to get people out to vote.
In my experience, where elections are concerned, that you can get a larger turnout if people believe that the vote will make a difference. And that is actually about the parties putting clear, distinct policies forward which differ. So, for example, Labour, we know their spending plans mean higher taxes. We know that we can control spending and we can cut taxes. We know we're going to put more police on the streets. We're going to keep the pound. Labour would want to scrap the pound, and that's their objective in the next Parliament.
Matthew Taylor, there is a difference. That's what enthuses people.
Well, I think there was an enthusiasm at the last election, let's not forget. People were determined to get rid of the Conservatives. They had been disastrous. They'd seen the catastrophe in hospitals and schools, in pensions, the tax rises, the broken promises, the sleaze. They wanted the Conservatives out, and there was a genuine enthusiasm, and it delivered a record result, not just for the Labour Party, but for the Liberal Democrats as well. The problem this time, I think, is that sense of disappointment. Labour came in saying they're going to change things, and now they're saying, well, actually, it didn't take 4 years, but we will do it next time. Well, that's pretty unbelievable. And that's why we're saying, look, you know why that is? Because you can't have big improvements in schools and hospitals and pensions, and yet not cost you a penny. That's what the other two claim.
You're bravely going to this election saying we'll raise your taxes.
We'll say, look, if we ask you for just a penny on income tax, we can deliver that transformation in education that Labour failed to deliver. If we ask the very wealthy, those over £100,000 a year in earnings, to pay a little bit more, we can deliver the transformation in pensions and in hospitals that Labour failed to deliver. You can't get something for nothing, that's true, but it is affordable and it is necessary. We all know it's necessary. Even the Conservative adverts say there aren't enough doctors, teachers and nurses.
OK, thanks very much. Just stay with us. We're waiting for the Prime Minister's statement at that school in South London. But we can go over now to John Pienaar, our correspondent, who's standing by outside number 10 Downing Street. John, how easy is it for a Prime Minister to make the transition between being the leader of the country to partisan politics and getting on with the job of, he hopes, winning this election?
Well, some might argue less difficult for this Prime Minister than for others in the past. Labour's often been accused of being, almost since the moment of being elected to power in May 1997, in permanent campaigning mode, reacting, wary about the latest newspaper headlines, an eye on the polls constantly as far as the impact of policies are concerned. They've denied much of that, but that has been an abiding impression with many people. And now we see the party moving to straightforward campaigning, setting its stall up before the electorate.
Now, we've been talking here in the studio and indeed with people around the country about how easy it will be to enthuse people to turn out at the polls in this election. How big a worry is it in number 10? And also, to what extent are they worried that it will affect Labour disproportionately badly if there's a low turnout?
I think logic and the evidence of the last elections, the local elections and the European elections, suggest that apathy and complacency and disillusionment will be more of a problem for Labour than for the other parties. We know that with the pollsters predicting such a runaway victory at the very start of the campaign, there must be a danger that many of those who would wish to see a Labour government would consider the thing to be done and dusted already and therefore not bother to vote. They have to motivate those people. As far as apathy is concerned, again, they have to get those people out, persuade them that the business of politics and of government is of some relevance to them and they need to get involved in it. And of course there's disillusionment. Those who fear the government has not delivered on its promises to the sort of degree they'd expected at the time of the last election, they have to reach those too. And we have seen in those past elections that in many cases core Conservative voters seem to be more highly motivated to turn out and vote. That was the principal reason why William Hague and the Tories were able to defy the polls and the pundits at the time of the European election and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Now, no one I think is in the polling industry is predicting such an outcome to this election, but still there is a good deal to be played for, and it's not just a question of who wins and who loses. Even if you accept that has pretty much been decided, it's a question of setting out their stall to the electorate, engaging them and persuading them.
John, thanks for the moment. Let's quickly check in again with what's going on in that school in South London. Well, actually, it seems to be a couple of very, very exciting-looking microphones, but presumably that's the podium from which the Prime Minister will finally announce the date of the election. We'll go back over there when there's something slightly more thrilling. And let's cross over to the Commons and see what's going on there. Well, it's business as usual, as you can see. The Commons business will continue until the Commons is Parliament is formally dissolved. Many MPs will then return to their constituencies, knowing they've got a real fight in their hands. Let's cross over to the Commons Central Lobby, where my colleague Diana Medill is getting reaction from MPs as to what awaits them. Diana.
Indeed, they'll soon be on the campaign trail and fighting to defend their seats. We've got 3 MPs here at the moment: John Redwood for the Tories, Jenny Tongue for the Liberal Democrats, and Alan Michael for Labour. John Redwood, what's the issues on the ground that you're going to fight on this time?
3 big things. First of all, taxation. Why have they ripped us off? Why are they wasting all our money? We want to give some of the money back to the public who can spend it better. Secondly, public services. Why are they in such a mess? Why have they failed to deliver their promises on schools, hospitals, law and order, and asylum seeking? And thirdly, we want to save the pound that keeps some democracy in Britain from these 2 parties that want to give away even more of our right to self-government and make this the last election, if they had their way, in a properly free, self-governing country.
And this is what you're going to have to fight against, Jenny Tongue, because the Tories are your main rivals in your constituency.
Yes, indeed, but I think what we've got to do is cut through all the hypocrisy and cant that we hear from the other parties. We know that public services are essential to the people of Britain, and we say that honesty is the best policy. If we want good public services, we cannot, on the one hand, say we're going to cut taxes and demand better and better and better hospitals and schools all the time. So we're saying we've got to be honest with the electorate. If you want good public services, then maybe we've got to pay more in taxes.
But the Liberal Democrats have got to make themselves very distinct from Labour, don't they, this time round?
I think that is a very distinct position, because the Labour Party is still trying to pretend that they haven't put up taxes. We know that they have put up taxes, but it's gone on to indirect taxation instead of open and honest direct taxation where people can see what they're paying.
Now, Alan Michael, your constituency is Wales. You've had devolution there, and you've also apathy to fight, I would imagine, to this election.
I'm not so sure. I think when you talk to people on the streets, this election is going to come down to ordinary things that affect ordinary people. The chance of a job, the strength of the economy, education, health, things like that. And by and large, people know that we've got a stronger economy, that more of the money, actually 25 pence in the pound more, going into services instead of things like paying off the national debt, and more money going into education and health. But they know as well that it's only half a job that's been done up to now. There's so much more to be done, and I think people will want to be reassured that we're going to complete the job, and that of course is the job for the next government.
But just very quickly, do you think people have an appetite for an election, for a campaign?
I'm not sure that people have appetite for an election, but because they think that as a lot of election coverage and political coverage generally is, it's about conflict. But what they do want to see is the sort of policies that are coming into place carried through for the long term.
Thank you all very much indeed, Alan Michael, Jenny Tongue and John Redwood.
Diana, thanks very much. The time now is just coming up to 3 o'clock. We're expecting the Prime Minister to make his statement within the next 10 minutes or so. We'll be bringing it to you live here on this BBC News 24 special report. First, let's remind ourselves of the day's events so far. Philippa Thomas reports.
As he emerged from number 10, the Prime Minister should have been in extremely confident mood. Tony Blair was on his way to Buckingham Palace, sitting on the largest parliamentary majority in decades and facing an opposition party lagging well behind in every opinion poll. His every move was followed by the cameras and hovering helicopters. But the first delay, as the Prime Ministerial Jaguar was stuck at traffic lights, was a reminder that, of course, he's only human. The Conservatives are warning that opinion polls deceive, and unexpected events and scandals have a nasty habit of intervening in the best-laid political plans. So, as the PM's car slid through the gates of the palace, the adrenaline of the moment must have been mixed with an element of nerves. Of course, the audience which followed between the Queen and her Prime Minister remains entirely private. But apparently all went smoothly and quickly, only 15 minutes to seek and grant approval for Britain's next election. In recent days, Mr. Blair's image has been that of a man of the people, touring this maternity unit, for example, at a Teesside hospital. He's lectured his cabinet ministers on the importance of humility, of avoiding any signs of government complacency or arrogance, of promising that they know there's much more to be done.
We've made a big choice, and our choice is to get investment into the key public services, to put schools and hospitals first, and we can do that precisely because of the economic stability that we've achieved over these 4 years, and there will be a choice for the country too, whether we're going to have investment in our key public services or whether we're going to go back to the days of cutback and closure under the Conservatives.
But the Conservatives say this government has been all spin and no delivery, and it's not too late for a change of political fortunes.
I think millions of people haven't made their minds up, and I think they will resent being told that it's all over and that their vote is worthless. I say to them, you do have a choice. This is your opportunity to choose the government of the country, and we've had a government that is now not asking for a second term so much as a second chance. And after 4 years, class sizes are higher, waiting lists have gone up, violent crime has gone up, taxes have gone up as well. Can you afford to give them a second chance?
Are you interested in the general election?
Yes.
Are you sure?
The Liberal Democrats leader, meanwhile, has beaten Tony Blair to a South London school, the first in a series of whirlwind stops over the next few days. Charles Kennedy may be running a poor third, but says he's optimistic.
A well-planned campaign. It's taking me to every part of Britain, even in the first 3 days for that matter, and we've been up and running really over the last month. The feedback we're getting is good. I think that there is quite a lot of disillusion for various reasons with the other parties, and I think that the opportunity this now gives the Liberal Democrats to put our distinctive message across will augur well for polling day.
The party leaders will only come face to face once more before the vote. It's expected that Parliament will sit until the end of the week, giving them the chance to engage in rhetorical battle tomorrow at the last session of Prime Minister's Question Time. Mr Blair, together with Education Secretary David Blunkett, has now gone to Southwark, crossing the Thames to make his election announcement at a nearby school. It's very nearly time for the Prime Minister to stand on his record and wait for the country to judge him. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, while we're expecting, or waiting rather, the Prime Minister to appear on that podium at St Saviour's and St Olaf's School in Southwark, Professor Anthony King, who's the BBC's guide on these occasions, joins us now. Tony, the question of turnout, how far is that going to be the key to this election? Because everybody, as you've been saying, it could be a record low turnout, less than 70%. How much does it really matter?
I don't think it's going to be the key to the election at all. Though if turnout is very low and Labour is returned, it will somewhat tarnish Labour's mandate. Everyone seems to think that if there is a very low turnout, it will harm Labour disproportionately. In fact, there's a good deal of evidence that there are a lot of Labour voters out there, people who would otherwise vote Labour, who are pretty disillusioned, uncomfortable with the failure, as they say it, of the Labour government to deliver. But there's almost as much evidence that there are quite a lot of disillusioned, disaffected Conservatives out there as well. Earlier on, we heard from some people who had voted Conservative even at the last election, who were very doubtful about whether they were going to vote Tory or vote at all at this election. I think turnout will be low. I think the Labour Party will be damaged somewhat as compared with the Conservatives, but not by as much as people think. After all, if people are not going to vote because they think Labour is going to win anyway, why should just Labour voters take that view? Why shouldn't Tory voters take exactly the same view?
Okay, let's find out why the Prime Minister has decided to go to this school on this day. Our chief political correspondent, Nick Robinson, is there. Nick, set the scene for us a bit. Tell us what kind of school it is.
Well, we are at a very unusual comprehensive school, though as soon as we all saw this phrase, Grammar School Foundation, we thought it was particularly unusual. Labour Party spin doctors were very quick to assure us that it was a comprehensive school, but this is a school that brought together two ancient grammar schools at the beginning of the century. It's an all-girls school, it's a church school, and it's partly selective. A pretty small proportion, but nevertheless a proportion of the pupils here are selected. It's what's called a beacon school by the government, in other words, a school picked out for performing particularly well. In that sense, this is a particularly Tony Blair occasion. There are plenty of Labour politicians who don't frankly approve of schools like this, even ones within the state school sector. He, of course, has emphasised the future of selective education, some selection, some specialisation at least, within the state sector. He's here in Southwark. He's going to be preceded by a choir made up of largely black children from South London who only last week were at Southwark Cathedral singing for Nelson Mandela. And Tony Blair will then go onto the stage as part of a school assembly. He speaks before there's a hymn actually by the school, and behind him will be two stained glass windows with the school motto, heirs of the past, makers of the future. Some of my colleagues in the writing press said it's beyond parody, but it's probably going to work.
Well, if we can all just catch our breath for a moment after that. How far, though, people are going to say, Conservatives will say, this is again all spin and no delivery. It's a lovely day. It's a beautiful photographic opportunity. There'll be some lovely singing from these children who are a wonderful choir. But what's it got to do with an election?
Well, what it's got to do with the election is the key theme: education, education, education. The Prime Minister, I'm told by his advisers, thought education was his crucial message last time and was keen to talk about it at a school. They want to say, well, look, we're not running away from our record as the Tories claim. We're proud of our record of delivery. And by coming to a school, Tony Blair wants to say, we believe we've achieved a lot in the public services, particularly in schools. Look, we may not have achieved everything we set out to, but that's why we want your trust for a second term. We've got the investment in place, we have the reform programme in place, back us again. So the symbolism really is about his message on the public services. As well, he wants a more casual, informal environment that coming out in Downing Street itself, Kevin, he is aware, of course, that the polls say that people have regarded him as getting a little arrogant, a little out of touch, as Prime Ministers often do, and this maybe is an attempt to make him more in touch.
OK, Nick, thanks very much for now. Andrew Lansley, what do you make of all this? I mean, your party will do the same kind of thing too. There's nothing wrong with that, to go to a nice school and make a day of it.
Nothing at all wrong with visiting a school, but I think it illustrates the Prime Minister's sense of weakness about his record on failure to deliver, because he's trying to make up with spin for what government have failed to deliver in practice. Where schools are concerned, for example, secondary school classes are larger than they were 4 years ago. The rate at which school standards were improving has decreased under Labour compared to the years before the last election. The rate of education expenditure in the early years of this government was lower as a proportion of national income than under the Conservatives. We found Labour have attacked selection. Indeed, David Blunkett, I saw, was with Tony Blair. It was David Blunkett who said he was opposed to selection and wouldn't countenance it. So right across the country, there are people who will see, I'm afraid, a great deal of hypocrisy in the way in which Mr. Blair is going to this school and expounding these ideas when he has failed to deliver.
Let's just see where William Hague is today. That's the scene in Watford. I'm not quite clear who the people holding placards are, but it's Keep the Pound.
That looks like Keep the Pound placards.
This is where William Hague is. I must say, I must congratulate you all on delaying the election till the weather got better. That's one of the best all-party decisions that anybody's ever...
It makes for more enjoyable canvassing, that's for sure.
Matthew Taylor, how far are you going to be people's second best? I mean, you did very well last time through tactical voting, through not getting squeezed. I mean, do you expect a very sophisticated electorate to do the same kind of thing this time?
Well, of course, there are seats where we're clear challengers. Of course, the irony of Tony Blair being in Southwark is this is an area where we are taking on and beating the Labour Party, both Simon Hughes as a local MP and on the council as well. So people in Southwark aren't turning to the Labour Party, they're turning to the Liberal Democrats. And there is a very stark contrast between what we saw of Charles Kennedy's visit to a school and Tony Blair's. On the one hand, you've got Charles actually engaging with the children, talking with the staff today, meeting some real people, and you saw this incredibly choreographed Labour Party machine moving into this school that bears no reality at all compared to most schools in the country, which Labour these days, of course, refer to as bog standard comprehensives, not something that people who actually have to use these schools would appreciate from the government in charge of them.
Whatever next. But I don't know whether can we go over to Watford again? There were some rather good pictures. Perhaps we'll go back to it in a second. William Hague, I think, is going to say something at this rally. It's a Keep the Pound rally. I saw him just a second ago with his wife Fionn by his side, walking through quite a warm crowd there. No? Well, perhaps people don't, Stephen Byers, turn out for political rallies anymore, do they?
Well, it's a pretty poor do if you've got, I think, more photographers than members of the public. But of course, according to Andrew Lansley, this is nothing to do with spin. I mean, what we're trying to do, I think all political parties, let's be honest about this, are trying to present our policies in the best possible way. We've always done it, and we will continue to do so. And
well, let's just hear a little bit from Mr. Hague, if he's doesn't go down well with everybody on our panel. Let's hear what's going on at this rally in Watford.
Wonderful to have William here. It shows how seriously the Conservative Party is taking Watford and how important Watford is to the party. With no more to say, I'll hand over to William Hague, leader of the Conservative Party, the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Michael, ladies and gentlemen, Fionn and I are delighted to be here with you in Watford today at the start of the Conservative general election campaign. which is going to be a tremendously successful campaign. And you know, when Tony Blair called the election this afternoon, he wasn't so much running on his record as running away from his record. And not so much asking for a second term as asking for a second chance. And after 4 years of Labour, the class sizes are higher, the waiting lists are longer, crime is rising, and taxes have gone up. Can you afford to give them a second chance? No, you can't afford to give them a second chance. And if people want in this election a party that will hit crime hard, that will keep your taxes down, that will improve local schools, and that will keep the pound, then that is what they will get from the Conservative Party, because that is what the Conservative Party stands for. And don't let anybody tell you that people don't have a choice in this election. They have a choice, and we will be taking the campaign out to the real people of the country, not to the politically correct commentators. I want to talk to people who are interested in the price of petrol more than proportional representation. People who are interested in the GCSEs their children will get rather than repealing Section 28. People are more interested in whether their daughter can walk home safely than whether she can serve in the front line. And people who see the pound as a symbol of our country rather than the Millennium Dome. And these are the real people of our country. And in this election, we are going to give them a choice. And that is what this election is about. People should have a choice after the tax rises on their petrol, their pension, their marriage, their mortgage. Ask yourself the question, if the government has so much money, of your money, that it can afford to spend more than £100 million advertising how good it is, then it's got too much of your money. And I want to give you some of that money back to the savers, to the pensioners, to the married couples with young children, to the car users. I want to give you back some of the money stolen from you in stealth taxes. And that is what we're going to do. And we're going to hit crime hard. This government have released over 33,000 criminals from prison.
We're going to leave William Hague there at the Save the Pound rally in Watford. I can promise you, you'll hear a lot more from Mr Hague and all the other politicians throughout this election campaign. But this general election is also the first to be fought post-devolution. In Scotland and Wales, many issues are handled by their respective Parliament and Assembly. So how are these contests going to be fought? Diana Medill is in the Commons Central lobby now. Diana.
Indeed, I've got Alex Salmond, the former SNP leader here, and also Elfyn Llwyd from Plaid Cymru as well. Alex Salmond, do you think devolution changes the way that this campaign will run from your point of view?
I think it changes it fundamentally, both in Scotland and in Wales. It's very interesting, the only place in the United Kingdom, the only places where Labour support is actually falling just now are Scotland and Wales. And I think it's going to be the only exciting part of the election. There's no real credible challenge south of the border. We just heard William Hague, and the man's a quitter. But north of the border and in Wales, there's a real toe-to-toe struggle between New Labour and the SNP and Plaid Cymru.
The issues then for you, Elfyn Llwyd?
Well, ensuring a better deal for Wales, quite simply, a better deal for pensioners, for minors and their widows, education, students, and ensuring that we fund the NHS properly. Let's remember that New Labour is spending less on public services than the Tories were, and we're not going to have it. If New Labour think they can take Wales or Scotland for granted, they've got another thing coming.
So great excitement here on the ground. You're ready to hit the trail?
Ready to hit the trail north of the border, and I think we're going to have in Scotland and Wales a real election as opposed to the sort of pretendy election you're having in England.
We'll see what happens. Alex Salmond, Elfyn Llwyd, thank you both very much indeed.
Diana Medill, thank you very much. Let's quickly check in again with what's happening in South London. If you can see the pictures of the school there, which I'm looking at. There we are. Some of the girls, which is presumably the choir, are filing into St Saviour's and St Olaf's School in Southwark. The Prime Minister, well, we were told he was going to come out and make his announcement at 3:10, but obviously slightly delayed. Let me bring in our guest again, Matthew Taylor for the Liberal Democrats. Very interesting to hear the nationalist view there, because your party is in the most peculiar straddle. I mean, you're fighting an election against the Labour Party in England, and you're in government with them, essentially, in Wales and Scotland.
And let's look at the difference it's made, because that's probably one of the crucial issues for people in these elections. What difference does it make when the Liberal Democrats actually get to have a share in power? And what you see in Scotland, the abolition of tuition fees, big increases in salaries for teachers so we can recruit the teachers our children need in the in schools, more books and equipment, and now, of course, the move to get rid of old people having to pay for their care, which should be free through the NHS, but at the moment having to sell their homes to pay for it. We're changing that too.
You should be in coalition with them in Westminster too, should you?
Well, we will work with others to achieve the things we're campaigning for, the improvement in pensions, the investment in schools, the investment in getting waiting lists down in the hospitals and the doctors and nurses. And what we've shown in Scotland and Wales is that we can actually deliver on this.
But you'd love to be in coalition with them in London too, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily with the Labour Party. We would love to have the chance to make the difference. And that's what people can deliver in the general election. The more votes, more seats that we win, we won a record number last time, we can do better still this time, will allow us to make those changes. Can I just say, though, William Hague, that extraordinary scene in Watford, hardly anybody there, fighting a referendum campaign on the euro.
The turnout at political rallies is not always a guide to anything, is it?
Well, the last political rally I was at was in my constituency, and we had 1,000 people during the last general election campaign at Carlisle Bay. So, no, it doesn't necessarily boil down to 20 people and 20 photographers. But no, there's a serious political point. William Hague is attempting to fight a referendum campaign on the euro that won't be called for some years because he's got absolutely nothing else to say. And I've never seen anyone look more like Michael Foot at the start of a campaign. The short hair, perhaps, but otherwise, the ramshackle campaign at the start, I can't believe.
I'll bring in you in a second on that resemblance. But first, Stephen Byers, on this question of coalitions working north of the border in Scotland and in Wales, I mean, this is a very odd position too for the Labour Party. He's suggesting, Mr Taylor's suggesting, it's only him that's keeping you honest in Scotland and in Wales.
Well, I think devolution's been a great success. It was one of the pledges that we made during the last election campaign. It's been delivered on. And the very nature of devolution is that things will be done differently in Wales and Scotland. That's one of its great strengths. And there is a coalition in both Wales and Scotland, and and we entered that. It was our initiative that achieved that coalition government. Quite different though for the United Kingdom, and we want a mandate to see change through. And
the difference is you don't need them here. That's the difference.
This election will determine whether we do or not. I mean, that's the point about the election. And I think people who say, well, take it as given that Labour is going to be returned with a massive majority, that depends on the British people. They are going to have a choice. And I agree with William Hague here. There is going to be a choice.
Would it be better if you didn't have a landslide so you could actually have an opportunity to work across party lines?
I want to be returned with a majority of over 200. But I know that it will be the British people that determine that. The reason why we need a good turnout and a endorsement of our policies is that we want a mandate for change. We've got to reform our public services significantly, and we need the British people to actually vote for that, which is why turnout is important and why we need to get a commanding majority in the new Houses of Parliament.
Let's check in again with the school in South London and see how things are developing there, while I bring in Andrew Lansley on some of those points. First, the resemblance or otherwise between Michael Foot and William Hague. Let's stick beyond the physical. Let's talk about the politics of it. I mean, the argument that's being made is that he's in real trouble, the party is not loyal to him, there's been a lot of backbiting in the last few months, and despite brave faces all round, you're actually not in very good shape.
Actually, the comparison couldn't be more different. What William Hague is saying in the course of his rally there in Watford is that he is driving towards those issues that matter to the mainstream majority, that we want to see the delivery of services in our schools and our hospitals, so we want to see the bureaucracy ended, that we want to hit crime hard, that we want to have more police, that we want to keep the pound, that we want to see taxes kept down. There was keep the pound, and a whole range of other issues were being discussed there. You could hear William talk about them all. The point is that he was talking about issues that matter to the mainstream majority and policies that they will agree with. Of course, in 1983, the Labour Party was the party of extremism, and more now we see the Labour Party going back toward the days of high spend and tax and of bureaucracy and state interference.
Well, there's Mr Blair, who has arrived at the school. It's jackets off this campaign. I'm not sure what that means, beyond the fact that it's probably as warm there as it is here. He seems in a good mood, as indeed did Mr Hague today. Let's perhaps listen in as the head teacher, it looks like, calls for some kind of order.
Before I start, please ask the members of the press and anybody else to turn their mobile phones off, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the Prime Minister, Mr Tony Blair, to St Saviour's and St Olave's School. We're going to start. The choir are going to sing "The Children Are Our Future." This is a song written by a school in Wales, and the reason that we're going to sing it is because it's very pertinent to our school, because our motto and our mission is, as is on our stained glass windows, heirs of the past, children of the present, makers of the future.
Yeah, I'm not sure the sound quality on this is good enough. It's our problem. It's not the choir's problem. It's just that we've set our microphones so that we can hear the Prime Minister and all of the formalities, but we can't really hear very well the choir. I'm sure they're lovely, but we'll continue just our discussion until the Prime Minister talks. Andrew Lansley, let's talk a little bit about the euro, because it's one issue which really does seem to play for you. How big will you be trying to play it in the campaign?
Well, it's clearly an important issue, because after polling day, there is either going to be a Labour government which is committed to scrapping the pound, with all the economic and political consequences that flow from that, or a Conservative government committed to keep the pound, to being able to run our economy in our national interest. We've learnt painfully, I'm afraid, in the past, indeed under past Conservative administration, that trying to run our economy with interest rates and economic policies which are designed for entry to a single currency can be extremely damaging to this country and could imperil the economic inheritance which this Labour government achieved. Stephen Byers sits here as Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. Labour didn't deliver the economic stability. Conservatives delivered economic stability. It was 2.5% inflation, 3.5% growth, and 6.25% interest rates when Labour came into office. What Stephen Byers has presided over is competitiveness gone from 9th to 19th in the International League table, no reduction in the productivity gap, a loss of competitiveness, burdens on industry, and 350,000 lost jobs in manufacturing.
Stephen Byers answer some of those points.
I mean, the reality is, as Andrew knows, that when we came into office in May 1997, inflation was about to take off, which is why the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the reason is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer was advised by the Governor of the Bank of England to actually increase interest rates, but he refused for political purposes to do that. We've given freedom to the Bank of England to make interest rate decisions. We're getting the benefit of that. 300,000 more companies in business today than in May 1997. And on this issue, I know Andrew is distorting our position. We're not saying we're going to scrap the pound. What we're saying very clearly is that we have confidence in the British people to make a decision on whether or not we should join.
That's an attempt, forgive me, but that's an attempt to kick it into touch beyond the election when they're trying to bring it up.
Well, I mean, they're trying to bring it up because they think it's something which is popular, but they're distorting our position. Our position is very clear, which is that if people have reservations about joining the single currency, they'll be able to express those in a referendum which will be held in due course, provided the economic conditions are met. And we believe it's in the national interest to join. Then it will be for the government to recommend to Parliament, and then it will be for the British people. So, no, Andrew, you don't like it because it's the truth of the position. We're giving the British people a choice. The British people are having a choice.
Gentlemen, we'll just have to hold it there. Here comes the Prime Minister, who's going to make his statement about the election.
Marvellous. And Irene, thanks very much indeed, and thank you, all of you, for having me here this afternoon to speak to you. And I think I should say it right at the very outset, a special word of thanks to Irene Bishop, your head teacher, because, you know, a few years ago, you used to get round about, I think, 17% getting 5 A to C's at GCSE. Now it's 50%. So that's down to Irene and the teachers, and of course you, the pupils. So well done. Very good. Now, earlier today, I saw the Queen of Buckingham Palace to ask for a dissolution of Parliament so that there can be a general election on the 7th of June. Every vote in this election is precious. No one's support should ever be assumed. That is the strength of our democracy. We earned the trust of the people after 18 years, 18 long years of opposition. We earned that trust some 4 years ago, and now we have to earn the trust again. And I stand before you today with a sense both of humility and of hope. Of humility because though we can take pride in many achievements since May 1997, we know we still have so much to do, so many challenges to overcome, and we know also that though we have striven hard for your trust at all times, there have been times of difficulty too. But hope, because in every single area of our national life that we promise to change, however much there remains to do, there are foundations of real change, signs of real progress, beacons lit showing a better way. 4 years ago, this country gave us, New Labour, a majority larger than I or anyone else would have believed possible. But that large majority was never a reason to do the job quickly, but to do it properly, for the long term, in a way that would last. And no government of change in any country that I can think of has done it all in one program, one budget, one term of office. 4 years has given us the chance to build foundations, but the work now has to go on. There is a lot done. There is a lot more to do, and there is a lot at stake in this election. Perhaps choices more fundamental than at any time for many years in our country. So what are these foundations, and what must we build upon them? I suppose the achievement that has most gladdened our supporters, surprised our doubters, has been our economic record. This is indeed a new type of Labour Party, a new Labour government, pursuing both economic prosperity and social justice together. Today, as a result, Britain is the 4th largest economy in the world, with the lowest inflation in Europe, mortgage rates half of what they were in the 80s and 90s, with more people at work today than ever before. Living standards are rising. And it didn't happen by chance, but because we took the tough, the difficult decisions necessary to lay those foundations of economic stability. Now, however, we have to go further, meet the challenge of economic change that sweeps right across our world, and give our people the skills, the technology, the know-how, so that everyone gets the chance not just of a job, but of a career, able to earn a decent living and make the most of themselves. Nothing is possible without that basic hard-won economic stability. Do you know, when we came to office some 4 years ago, we used to spend as a country more on the interest payments on our national debt than we did on the whole of the school system of the United Kingdom. Today, this year, we will spend some £10 billion more on education. So there has been a change of priorities. And then when we had the money to invest, we said something else those 4 years ago. We said the number one priority would be education. Education, education, education. Then, now, and in the future. In nurseries and in primary schools in particular, we have seen the real progress as real improvement and investment has taken place. In 1997, you know, barely half of the 11-year-olds in our country passed their tests. This year, the figure will be almost 80%. But now the same step change has to be driven through our secondary schools and our universities, and for this reason, so that we end that tired old resignation shared by so many in Britain, even today, that there always have to be two systems of education, one for the privileged few, and the other, narrow, steep, and hard, for the rest of our young. In our health service, waiting lists are lower, new hospitals are being built, there are some 17,000 more nurses today. Visit many accident and emergency departments, or use the NHS Direct service and you can see change. But again, we still have much further to go if we are going to rebuild the National Health Service properly
on its basic founding principle of healthcare based on need, not ability to pay. In crime and law and order, yes, it is true, crime has fallen some 10% since 4 years ago, and the numbers of police are now rising in our country today after falling for a decade. But drug abuse still blights too many lives, too many communities still threatened by violent crime. So progress, but again, a lot more to do before that investment that is now going in gives us what we will have in a few years' time, the largest ever number of police officers Britain has seen. And as many of you will know, the New Deal has shown that governments can indeed make a difference in the fight against unemployment. Our programme of welfare reform has led to benefit bills falling in this country, in real terms, the amount we spend on benefits falling for the first time in decades. And at the same time, the minimum wage has lifted the pay of hundreds of thousands. But once again, we know that even today, even with that progress, still 1 in 6 non-pensioner households has no one working. And even with the recent rises in pension and the winter allowance, we need to do far more to reward our pensioners who've saved hard all their lives. Full employment we need for this generation, and real security for the generation of our parents and grandparents. Or in other areas like transport or the renewal of our inner cities. Yes, there are plans for investment and renewal, but again, we are acutely aware of the challenges that lie ahead. Through devolution, we have a new partnership that has strengthened the United Kingdom and a peace process in Northern Ireland that for the first time in generations has offered the prospect of a peaceful future for people there. But again, more to do. So what I say to my country today is the work goes on, and now I seek a mandate, not simply for more of the same. I seek a fresh mandate for fresh and radical change. You know, most people, quite rightly, do not pass their time immersed in politics. They have their bills to pay, the job to do, the family to raise, the 1,000 pressures of everyday life to contend with. But the one thing that a general election does is this. It is a chance to explain, to engage in a sustained argument about the big issues and about the country's destiny and direction. And that decision as to who governs our country, it is a fundamental one. And an election is a chance to have the dialogue with people that we need. People listen, they hear the arguments. And so I intend to travel to every part of the country, not just defending our record, but arguing for the changes our country still needs to make. And the spine of that campaign will be a series of speeches that set out the challenges facing the country and the reforms, the changes necessary to meet those challenges. So yes, it may be great that we have stable economic management today, but it's not enough. We need a step change in productivity, skills, science, enterprise, and we need reform to deliver it. And yes, of course, I'm proud of the record investment now going into our schools and our hospitals, but it isn't just money that schools and hospitals need. They also need real reform to make the money work and to deliver the type of services that people need in this day and age and depend upon. And yes, of course, it's a step in the right direction and welcome to get police numbers rising again. But on its own, it's not enough. Not when we have a 19th century criminal justice system trying to cope with the 21st century world. It's an achievement we have welfare bills falling, but there are still far too many people not working who could be, and so continuing welfare reform has to be a central part of our second term. And I'm proud too that Britain is no longer marginalized, isolated in Europe. But we're not yet. the leading nation in Europe that our weight and our prosperity and our history demand. So the mandate we seek before our country is this. As New Labour, we seek a mandate not just for continuity, but for change, for a Britain that is strong and modern and fair. We seek a mandate to make all the reforms necessary to strengthen, modernize, and revitalize our schools and our hospitals. We seek a mandate for investment, investment to extend opportunities, ending years of cutbacks that have denied young people the chance to get on. We seek a mandate for the further reform of the welfare state, to make the tax and benefit system work, and to give people the rewards they need, tackle poverty, and penalize irresponsibility. And we seek a mandate to make Britain stronger. Stronger because we are engaged with Europe and the wider world, showing our leadership and not a nation in retreat. But this is a choice that I cannot make alone. The challenge is there for you as well as for me. For I see the differences between the two main political parties seeking to govern this country as probably more fundamental and more stark than at any time since 1983. For we know, and I believe, that today's Conservative Party would take us back to negative equity, to higher mortgages, back to boom and bust, back to cuts in public services, back to social division, back to a position of isolation in the world. So there is a choice. And this election fundamentally is about that choice. Which party will make our economy strong, will invest in our public services, and will give our country the leadership we need in the future we face. And it won't be easy. Nothing ever good is easy to achieve. You all know that any success you've ever had in life, whether it's an exam passed or a promotion gained, has had its fair share of tough choices and hard work and even pain. But afterwards, after the work and the application, comes the sense of a great goal achieved. And my goal at this election is this. It is not just to win your vote. It is to win your heart and your mind for the change that our country needs to face the challenges of the future. And it is a change not for its own sake, but for this purpose in which I passionately believe, to create a society in which everyone, not just a few people at the top, everyone gets the chance to succeed and make the most of their God-given abilities. And you all know the phrase, people in their rightful place. But I say to you today, we must reach a time in our time where the only rightful place for every man, woman, and child in Britain is where their talents take them. So the great issue in these coming weeks before this election is about opportunity for all, not just the few. It's about a radical vision of lifting barriers and liberating people's potential in a decent society where everyone gets the chance to get on. And I stand in this election for more investment, not less, economic stability, the foundation, schools and hospitals first, radical reforms, and equal chances in life. Britain is a great nation. It has so many strengths, but the biggest strength is its people. You, the young people here today, it's your motto, the children of the present, makers of the future. Yeah. That is so true. Whether this country succeeds or fails in the future will be down to you. Your talent, your ability, your potential. And this is the time, and I believe ours is the task, to set those talents free and build that land of hope and opportunity for all. Now, it is for you, in the coming weeks, for you, the people, to decide. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it. It is now official. The election will be on June the 7th, with the Prime Minister Tony Blair hoping for a historic second term for the Labour Party. Speaking at St Saviour's and St Olaf's School in Southwark, in South London, a school of real improvement, he said. He talked about how every vote is precious. No one's support should be assumed. He said he goes into this election with a sense of humility and of hope. I'm joined here in the studio by Andrew Lansley, who's the Shadow Cabinet Office Minister, and Matthew Taylor, Liberal Democrats' Treasury spokesman. Actually, I'm told Charles Kennedy for the Liberal Democrats is just about to speak. Let's hear Mr. Kennedy.
I very much welcome the fact that this long drawn-out phony war is over and we're into the general election proper. And I'm looking forward to it, and the party's in good heart, and we're looking forward to it here at party headquarters and right across the country. Now, general elections, obviously, are invariably a referendum and a result being passed by the people on the government of the day. But before I turn to that, I want to say a word about something else that general elections are. They're also a verdict on the opposition of the day. You can conduct yourself in opposition before a campaign and during it in an irresponsible way. You can be negative, you can be destructive, and you can play on people's fears. Or, as an opposition party in British politics, you can be positive, you can be constructive, and you can address people's aspirations. That's what we're going to do as a party. And I think that the marked contrast between the two opposition parties is going to be very evident in the course of this campaign, indeed, if it's not already today. The second thing to say is this, that during the course of this election, a government which is stressing the need for humility does itself have quite a lot to be humble about. It has to be humble because so many people 4 years ago who thought on so many areas, particularly of vital quality public service provision, in the words of a song, things could only get better, have been mightily disappointed. So there's another disastrous choice to be had in opposition. There's a hopeful choice in opposition with the Liberal Democrats, and there's the disappointment that is this government. So we're going to put the Liberal Democrats, quality service delivery in the public sector at the heart of our campaign. That means in education, a penny an income tax for lower class sizes, for more investment in books and equipment, and for lifting the burden on our teachers, who are sickened, as are so many civil service and public sector personnel, by the sheer enormity of bureaucracy upon them. It means, when it comes to care of the elderly in the health service, investment in more nurses, more doctors, more local hospitals, shorter waiting times. That will be a big improvement. It means, as Liberal Democrat ministers elsewhere in Britain have pioneered, the abolition of tuition fees for our students at one end of the age spectrum and free long-term care for the elderly at the other end of the age spectrum. It means more bobbies.
Charles Kennedy there for the Liberal Democrats, giving his reaction to the announcement that the general election will indeed be on June the 7th. I'm joined, as I was saying,